Hello, CSET Social Science students. This is Mr. Goyette with National University, reviewing with you some of the topics you have been discussing in your world history review for the discussion boards. And so a few of you brought up the topic of the Black Death, the Bubonic and Pneumonic plagues, both of one in 542 AD and most notably the one in the mid-1300s, 14th century. So let's take a look at the Black Death and some of the basic information you should know in case this topic comes up on the exam. The Black Plague that occurred in the mid-14th century spread along the caravan routes of Central Asia. It arrived at the Black Sea ports, and from there, because of Europe's active trade in luxury items that came from the Orient, from the East, it made its way into Europe through those items. And of course, it didn't get there necessarily because of the fabrics and the luxury items themselves, but what was on those cargo ships, specifically in this case, rodents, rats. The black Asiatic rat, to be specific, which we do have here. I'm in California, so if you're studying in California in the southwestern United States, the black Asiatic rat does live here. So occasionally there is a diagnosis of the plague here in California. Plague happens, it's endemic, so it occurs here and there, but usually it can be treated, and that's that. Basically, in 1347, merchant ships sailing from Kaffa in the Crimea to Messina in Sicily seems to have carried infected rats, and the plague broke out in Messina and spread rapidly from there. The most recognized form that spread was the Bubonic Plague, and this form was a pathogenic agent or germ called Bacillus pestis that spread by the fleas going from the rodents to the human being and then infecting them from there. The symptoms start with chills, a fever, headache, vomiting, and then they move into the swelling of the lymph nodes, lymph glands, and then something called swelling of the swelling bubos, B-U-B-O-S is where the swelling comes from. There's a clotting under the skin, and this clotting then turns dark, and that's where it gets its name Black Death, because you'd see it in someone walking past you and you notice their skin had these black blotches, and that's the Black Death. The clotting of the skin, or the clotting of blood underneath the skin. There's also the Pneumonic Plague. You think of pneumonia, of the lungs, breathing in and out. Also, the Pneumonic Plague, which was devastating in the 1300s as well. It's spread by coughing, and a lot of times we hear of the situations where the clergy would invite people who were suffering from the plague into the churches to pray, and they soon realized that this was a great way to spread it. And then because they didn't have any strong knowledge of germs and biological microscopic organisms, of course, because they didn't have microscopes, among other things. But the basic idea of the germs and pathogenic agents was not common knowledge. They or knowledge at all at that time. The people, by coming together, thought that they were protecting themselves in prayer, and that led to actually more people getting sick. The account given in the Western Experience text by some people who were actually there on the scene in the year of our Lord, 1348. There happened at Florence a most horrible plague, which had broken out some years before in the Levant, and after making incredible havoc all the way, had now reached the west. There, in spite of all the means that art and human foresight could suggest, such as keeping the city clear from filth and publication of copious instructions from preservation of health, it began to show itself in the spring, unlike what had been seen in the east, where bleeding from the nose is the fatal prognostic. Here there appeared certain tumors in the groin and under the armpits, some as big as a small apple, others as an egg, and afterwards purple spots in the most parts of the body, messengers of death. To the cure of this malady, neither medical knowledge nor the power of drugs was of any effect, whether because the disease was in its own nature mortal, or that the physicians, the number of whom taking quacks and women pretenders into account, was grown and great. Obviously, we know our author's attitude towards physicians. Could form no just idea of the cause. Whichever was the reason, few escaped, but nearly all died the third day from the first appearance of the symptoms, some sooner, some later, without any fever or other symptoms. What gave the more virulence to this plague was that it spread daily, like fire, when it comes in contact with bustables. He's referring to the bubons there. Nor was it caught only by coming near the sick, but even by touching their clothes. One instance of this kind I took particular notice of. The rags of a poor man just dead had been thrown into the street. 2 hogs came up, and after rooting amongst the rags, in less than an hour they both turned around and died on the spot. So there's one account from, eyewitness description of the ravages of the Black Death in Florence. It was written by one of the most famous citizens and writer, Giovanni Boccaccio. This passage comes from his masterpiece, the Decameron, written during the 3 years following the plague. So that gives you some idea of how the Black Plague swept across Europe. Glad to see that you're continuing discussion. Please take the time to respond to one another in the discussion boards. I believe that's one of not only a good way to share information, it's also important that you're doing some of the writing for those short focused responses in the CSET. The CSET questions aren't very long. You don't have to write enormous essays, but you do need to fit the relevant information concisely into 1 or 2 paragraphs and convey specifics. Make sure you have specifics in there, dates, specific names whenever you can, to show that you have knowledge of the subject area. Thank you for continuing with the course. Please call, Skype, email with your questions or concerns. I'd be happy to get back to you. Talk to you soon. Thank you.